Good evening and welcome to Folk Tales by the Fireside. I am Jade and I would like to read for you The Cauldron of Inspiration from Circle Round, Raising Children in Goddess Traditions. The Cauldron of Inspiration, retold by Starhawk. Circle round and I'll tell you the story of Gwion and the Cauldron of Ceridwen. The goddess Ceridwen had two children, both very dear to her. Her daughter, Cri Eri, was the most beautiful young woman in all the world, but her son, Avagthi, was the ugliest young man anyone had ever seen. Ceridwen worried over his future. She was afraid that nobody would like him or want to be his friend unless he had some special gift to make up for his looks. She decided to boil up a cauldron of inspiration and science for her son, so that everyone would admire him for his knowledge and brilliance and forget about his face. The cauldron had to be kept boiling for a year and a day while she gathered the proper herbs and magical plants at the right seasons, bearing in mind the influence of the moon and the movements of the planets and the stars. So, she set a blind man named Morda to tend the fire, and a young boy named Gwion to stir the cauldron. For a year they faithfully kept the cauldron boiling day and night. Whatever the weather or the changes of the moon, Morda kept the fire ablaze. And Gwion stirred, and Ceridwen gathered the magic herbs and plants. But one day, towards the very end of the year, 3 drops of the magic brew flew up out of the cauldron and landed on Gwion's finger. They burned his tender skin, and he put his finger in his mouth to cool it. But all the magic of the cauldron had gone into those 3 drops. Suddenly the whole world changed for little Gwion. The birds were singing in the trees, and now he could understand their conversations as they gossiped. The branches of the trees whispered in the breeze, and he could understand the secrets as they passed back and forth. All the world came alive and spoke to him, and all time swirled together and became one. Past, present, and future were braided together like 3 twined strands of rope, and he could see what was to come as clearly as he knew what had been. And one thing he knew for certain, he had better get out of there fast before Ceridwen came back, because she was going to be mad. For Ceridwen was the mother of all inspiration and transformation. But she had a temper like a raging storm. Gwion turned and ran as fast as he could. Behind him, the cauldron burst into pieces, and all the remaining brew spilled into the stream. Ceridwen returned and saw the ruin of her whole year's work. She was so mad, she flew into a rage and started to beat poor Morda on the head. "Stop, stop, it wasn't me," he cried out. "It was little Gwion who robbed you." "You speak truth," Ceridwen said, and ran after Gwion. Gwion, running through the woods, saw Ceridwen chasing after him. Already he was getting tired and breathless. "What can I do? What can I do?" he cried to himself. "If only I could run like a hare," leaping and bounding along. Instantly he was changed into a leaping hare. His weariness vanished and he jumped and bounded so high he nearly seemed to fly. "She'll never catch me now," he exulted. And then he looked behind him. Cauldron had changed herself into a greyhound, and she was running along the ground so fast she would soon catch up with him. "What can I do? What can I do?" he cried to himself. Ahead of him was a broad river. If only I could hide beneath that water, she'd never find me there. He leapt up into the air, and when he landed in the river, he became a fish. Quickly he swam away. "I'm surely safe now," he told himself. But then he looked behind him. Cauldron had changed herself into an otter, and she was swimming after him. "What can I do? What can I do?" he cried again. "If only I had the wings of a bird, I could fly away from her." He made a mighty leap and hurled himself up on the riverbank. Instantly he became a swift bird and took wing. Far and fast he flew out over the sea. "At last I've escaped," he sighed. But then he looked behind him. There she was, changed into a soaring hawk. He wheeled and turned back towards the land, and she followed close behind. "What can I do? What can I do? I'll never escape her." For she was high above him now. And as he glanced up, she folded her wings and began to drop like a stone in for the kill. "I've got to find a place to hide," he cried. Below him was a barn, and inside a huge pile of wheat. Recklessly, he zoomed into the barn as the hawk wheeled and dipped to follow him. He dove into the wheat pile and changed himself into a single grain of wheat. "At last I'm safe," he thought, but Cauldron changed herself into a big black hen. Scratch, 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 she went, turning over the wheat in the pile with her big black claws, testing each grain with her big red beak. At last she found the grain that was little Guion, and she swallowed him up. No sooner did she swallow little Guion than she felt life stirring inside her. She changed back into the form of the goddess, and her womb began to swell. Bigger and bigger and bigger she grew, until 9 months later she gave birth to a beautiful boy child with a shining brow. Cauldron was still angry, but now the very person she was angry at had become her own baby. And a beautiful baby he was too. She just didn't have the heart to kill him, so she wrapped him in a leather bag, took him down to the sea, and let the waves take him away to meet his destiny. Now in those days there was a king in that part of the country named Gwythno. He had a special fish weir, a big fence of wicker set across the river that trapped the salmon as they swam upstream. Every May Eve, many fish were caught in that weir. Gwythno had a son named Elfin. Now poor Elfin was the sort of person that can never do anything quite right. If he went out to hunt, he would trip over his bowstring. If he went gathering berries, he would fall into the bramble and come home full of scratches with an empty pail. If he went out gathering mushrooms, well, those who valued their lives wouldn't dare eat the mushrooms that Elfin brought home. Gwythno decided to give Elfin a chance to improve his luck. He sent him down to the weir on May Eve to gather the fish that never failed to come, thinking that the sacred salmon would be a blessing for him. But when Elfin came to the weir, there were no fish to be found. All that lay trapped in the weir was a strange, bulging leather bag. "That's just my luck," Elfin sighed. Every year since the beginning of time, this weir has been filled with fish. But now, because it's my turn to gather them, there's nothing here. Nothing good ever happens to me. He was feeling very sorry for himself as he drew the bag out and opened it up. A pearly, gleaming light shone from the bag, and he looked in and saw the forehead of a baby. "What a radiant brow!" he exclaimed. And so the reborn Gwion was given a new name, Taliesin, which means shining brow. He drew the baby up and held it in his arms, and instantly felt comforted and strangely happy. "Well, you are not a load of fish of great value, but you are something wonderful after all," Elfin said. He placed the child before him on the horse and made her trot very gently back towards the castle, and the baby sat up and began to sing. "Dear Elfin, dry your tears. Do not think you have no gain. Put away your fears. Let go of your pain. Small as I may be, gifts, great gifts I bring. From the mountains, from the sea, from the rivers I will sing. My tongue will be your shield. My song will be the health of orchard, hearth and field. I am your luck, your wealth." This was the first poem made by Taliesin. Elfin took the boy home to his father. When Gwythnw asked who he was, whether human or spirit, and where he came from, he replied in another poem. "Cradled on the breast of the rolling sea, part of all being can I be. I have been a frog, a chain, a crow, a wolf, a cub, a fox, a roe. A thrush, a martin, the antler of a deer, a squirrel, a bull, a boar, a spear. I have been a grain of pure white wheat. I am anyone that you might meet. Cradled on the breast of the rolling sea, part of all being can I be. The seen and the unseen I can see. All that lives can speak to me." So Taliesin was reared in the court of Gwythnw as the adopted son of Elfin. From that day on, Elfin's luck turned until he was admired and respected by all, and Taliesin became the greatest poet of ancient Wales. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you didn't have a minor heart attack like I did when something cracked and I now have to go and find out what that was. Good evening, and I will see you next time.